that guy that was living in the boat in Tampa Bay said that Helena was worse for the Bay than this last one, Milton, which got much better hype.
Yeah, and it was just a swipe by, and he said, yeah, he got thrown into that wall he was anchored next to a few times, but that was about it.
Yeah, Lieutenant Dan. Yeah.
Yeah. How about you? What did you think of the hurricane?
Could have been a lot worse. You know, it reminds me about what Ray Pete said about how structure informs energy and energy informs structure. When the hurricane has nice, clean structure, very tight eye wall, everything's nice and dense, it feeds its energy, and that energy builds better structure. But when there's countervailing magnetic fields in the form of pressure and other wind formations and so forth, and the weather or land or other things, it can break that structure, which reduces the energy, and the reduced energy further destroys the structure. And that's kind of like how it is with biological health in the human body, is that with great energy, it helps produce great structure. Just like if you have a highly energetic prenatal environment, and in the womb, high energy, healthy thyroid, healthy hormonal balance, healthy energy, well rested, high energy person, high energy environment, low stress, joyful environment can produce a high energy, a highly structured, well designed, outcome. And yet there's so many stressors and chemical attacks and psychological attacks, all kinds of narratives built into our society that count against that and try to disrupt, the structure, and by disrupting the energy, lowering the energy of the body, lowering the energy of the baby being developed. And that kind of goes throughout all of life. A lot of people look at the country, America, during this election, and they notice there's a lack of energy. There's a lack of hope and confidence in people's ability to build great, engineering feats like the Golden Gate Bridge, or, go to Mars, build railways, subways that work beautifully, aesthetically pleasing to the eye, with good quality materials. All those things seem so far away, and so that low energy produces less structure in society. Less structure means a porous border, porous family structures, porous truth, porous workmanship, porous employment, consistency, porous management. All of these things start to decay and languish under low energy conditions. But you have high energy, comes with high hope, high creativity, high right hemisphere brain thinking, where you're looking at systems and you're able to play through all of the piano, not just one little note. And when you have that kind of environment, it builds structure and order, and that's where you get beautiful design, beautiful buildings, and beautiful movies and innovations. People look at today's popular music, and it's worse than ever before. On the whole, there's less structure to it. There's less melody. There's less harmony. There's less beauty. There's less energy in it. Now we're finding out that all the rappers that were supposed to be the final Robin Hoods, the outlaws of our society, turns out half of them are feds, like Diddy and all the other clowns who were manufactured into something to, basically drop the energy and drop the structure of communities that they were appealing to and still appeal to. So energy informs structure, structure informs energy, and they feed off on one another. You raise your energy level, the healthy energy, not the stress energy. You raise your healthy energy level, it can help your cell structure improve and rebound and regenerate better than before, and reverse aging and reverse signs of deterioration, degeneration, and lack of oxygen in the brain. And when you get your oxygen back and when you get your structure back, you're able to dream bigger, you're able to finish tasks. One of the things that is a clue of low thyroid is an inability to finish things like projects. It's just like this feeling of like, I just don't have, or even to begin a project, if there's a complex project, it just kind of, I just don't have the energy, I just don't have the time, just don't have the focus or any of those things. And of course, good sleep, paradoxically, Dr. Pete says, requires a high energy state to achieve restful sleep. And this just sounds paradoxical on the surface. People think that those who sleep must be low energy, but actually good restful sleep that's healthy and good for your body is actually something that is achieved through a high base energy state that all of those things working in harmony can produce. But then you look at the planet Earth, and planet Earth is also something that has structure and energy interdependent on one another. And Earth can improve its own metabolism. Earth can actually produce higher, more amazing forms of life that we can actually be co-creative in steering that direction. But we have been convinced of a false lie, both from religious circles that tell us that humans really don't have much place on Earth. God's going to destroy it with a fireball. And so it's really kind of a temporary stage by which a morality play is being unfolded. And you gotta have to just get your morals right, or get your ecclesiology right, get your church attendance right, or whatever it is that your particular sect is emphasizing to you. But the stage itself is rather immaterial, to the extent that it's beautiful. It's beautiful only insofar as it points to the immaterial platonic heavenly stage, right? And that's of course not what Christianity is about. The Bible's about kingdom of heaven coming into earth. Everything you see about Jesus, when someone asks him, how can I get to the eternal life? He tells them the story of the Good Samaritan. He doesn't talk about the good cherub floating on the cloud in a celestial city. He's talking about like people getting beat up and being saved in Jericho down the road. And that can be manifested like by your way of perceiving reality and acting accordingly.
Right.
So all of that, we get to participate in that co-creative aspect, and yet we don't realize what we could actually accomplish if we actually leaned into that.
So you're talking here about the abundance of this Pedian model that Ray has come up with of abundance and restoration of your body, of your psychology, of your, in some senses, your being. So, and you were talking about the porous nature of our structures. So one thing comes to mind, with Ray Pete, you can kind of get lost in this vortex of, well, I've got to be taking this vitamin, I've got to make sure to be eating this carrot salad at 10 o'clock on the button. So you can kind of get lost in the sauce a little bit with Ray. So how do you feel about, or how do you adjust for the porousness? So say one element you've brought up a couple times is sleep. So how do I bounce back if I didn't have a great night of sleep, if I tossed and turned and I didn't really dream great dreams that night? How can I come back on top of this thing and say, okay, we're back in action today? What can we do for those porous holes that show up like maybe one at a time? We skipped a meal, How do we bounce back from those moments?
Just having a mission that really makes you feel alive, that's the most important thing. You can chug as much milk and mushrooms as you want, but you're not going to be Super Mario until you have a princess to save out of the castle from Bowser. And so you got to be able to have a mission that just really truly animates you with every fiber of your being, like irresistible magnet drawing your life force towards it. That's one of the things that keeps me, pacing myself through all of the, the things that challenges that come along in life. Is you have to have these dreams that haunt you uh, with kind of like, you have to do it, you have to. It just feels it in your bones, like my existence is tied to this manifesting. And
That's
so,
interesting that you say that, because Lieutenant Dan of the seashore of Tampa, he he mentioned that. He said, I have felt it in my body, in my
yeah,
spirit, that I should go to Tampa, that I shall purchase a boat, and that boat will be me, and I will be one with the boat. And so he's had this dream of
yeah,
of of obtaining this thing and doing it. And he actually pushed off the dream. He said he lived elsewhere for a while and didn't fully make his way in the boat in Tampa Bay
yeah.
for quite a while. So that's interesting that you mentioned him earlier. Now you're talking about chasing of the dreams, and he has now lived through two hurricanes in this water.
And that's the funny thing about, like, the paradox of structure and energy, right? Is that, not to use these two literally, but you could say maybe the energy side of the equation is more in the realm of the dreams and the wild, ambitious, creative part of you, that spontaneous side of you. And the structure part of you might kind of coalesce around the idea of the more stable, structural, orderly, gotta wake up, gotta pay my light bill kind of thing, right? And that balance is really hard. Most people lean super, super hard into the destructive pattern either way. They're either not able to organize their life in such a way as to be effective at pursuing their dreams, you know, or they organize their life so much that they don't even realize that they were supposed to pursue something beautiful besides just having everything so mimetically, vanilla and safe from their perception. But, there's a lot of people that would say that someone, a lot of society is geared around making a guy that wants to put a boat in front of a hurricane look insane, right? Because that's not ordinary behavior, but that's part of where energy kind of breaks through that over calcified structure, which isn't very structured after all, but it looks structured, and breaks through it and says, no, in order to have the Wright brothers, we must also have Lieutenant Dan hiding, hurricane, because that kind of space for people to, follow what they feel convicted to do in that way of exploring, their life and what they're capable of doing, and what they find to be exhilarating and part of who they're supposed to be, is a journey that people can't really define for you exactly. It's something that kind of collides into your life if you have the desire to seek that. I have found that the more I have an open heart to receiving knowledge and digging deeper, the more God will download opportunities for me to receive insights that hit like a harmony, to the point where, and I'm not saying this to brag this statement, but I've had people say to me, there's nobody on planet Earth that thinks of Jesus more deeper than you. And I don't know how to receive that information. I just say, wow, what a humble, that's very humbling for me to even consider someone thinking that way about me. But the point is if you're hungry for it and you do the work, meaning you meditate and you seek and you look and you have a courage and a confidence in how you do that, and you find people and you seek people dead or alive to learn from, right? God will give you things that will be absolutely breathtaking, and and will put burdens on your heart to do great things in a way that is quite exciting to be a part of, you know. And one of the things that I
So
think the biggest enslavements, just on the other side of, you know, how the religious people tend to have a downplay on the earth, and the secular people who are also Christian imitators in a perverted way too, in their own way, they believe that planet Earth, in order to heal, must drastically reduce humans like fleas off of its back, you know. And that's why they've convinced the human population that the thing that CO2, which is the biggest thing for growing greater fruit and bigger plants and healthier, stronger, metabolically thriving and more intelligent animals and more intelligent humans and healthier humans and longer living humans, they want us to really hate any of that rising by any small measure, because they've convinced people that, in a similar way as some of the religious myths, that Earth's best days are behind it and it needs to just live in kind of a pristine healing period with most of humans shaken off of its back like parasites that were flung in the wind of the summer. But in reality, humans were meant to be the viceroy of creation, and they were meant to raise their collective metabolism as well, so that they can reduce the dependency on the stress state of their body and the stress state of their societies in order to get along and to get things done, right? And so the point of what Christ did on the cross, one of the points, is that it is to redeem our biological function so that we can redeem our sociological function. If they work in harmony together, when you have a body that is a mind and body that is free from a lot of chronic stress, which is the state of all of these diseases that are manifested, both the acute and these chronic diseases, virtually all of them are coming from this stress mechanism that Dr. Lewis Coleman talks about on my show, and others like Dr. Ray Peed and Hans Selye and other folks have talked about this unified theory of disease that is called the stress mechanism. And it's more complicated than I can do justice to it on the biochemistry level, but that's not how truth has to work. You can look at truth like an orchestra. I don't have to be an expert on the intricacies of the violin of biochemistry to help the violin work in unison with the trombone and the brass section and the drums and everything else. And that's what I see my role in my calling, is to be able to be an orchestra conductor of all of these various layers of truth and present a beautiful song with it, so that when you are sitting in a concert produced by David Gornoski, you may not know what the hell you just listened to, but you really enjoyed it. You know what I mean? And it really inspires you.
Yeah. Well, with that inspiration, how does one listen to the show, listen to what you're saying, take it all in, but how do they implement real world baby steps of getting on this vitality train on a ground level? So somebody might say, well, David, this all sounds great. This all sounds beautiful. I want it for myself, but I have just lost my mother and father. Or I was just given a diagnosis of cancer or diabetes, or my son does not speak to me. So these are real world stressors. How can I move through these?
It's just not one, there's no one formula in that sense. You know what I mean? It's like people have
where does one begin?
You have to believe in God. You have to believe that there's a creative force that is for your benefit, that you can interact with in the universe, and that is telling a story of including billions and billions of people through history, and you're just one person in it. But if you believe that you want to do great things, and those great things will be of service, they will not be of self-aggrandizement, but they will be a service orientation, and that's how you'll know it's from God. It doesn't mean you won't have wealth as a tool, possibly. Some people have that as a tool that God gives them, but if your telos is not one of self-aggrandizement and being a brown noser and a manipulator, you'll know that it's from God. God does not make brown nosers and just self-aggrandizing manipulators who play it safe. He makes people who really want to do beautiful things. And I think that's where you get the difference between the chosen and those who may be ontologically saved. What I mean by that is, uh, when you think about, who is going to be in the eternal kingdom of heaven, it might be a separate category from who is actually called out to do the things necessary to minister to the nations in the actual imitation of Christ all the way, so to speak. Not that they're fully like Christ, but that they're turning it up to 11 in their conscious imitation of the audacity and wildness, that risky excellence that Christ exemplifies. Some people may not be called for that. I don't know how that works. You know what I mean?
Do
So
you think it's
there's a lot of people, I can't give one answer because there's a lot of people who are 67. My audience tends to skew young, and I like to work with the young because they've accumulated less stress on the average, you know what I mean? Unless things have really gone bad for them in their childhood or teenage or what have you. But
right?
deal with the young, my audience tends to be young, and that's an opportunity to do something with, right? And really build something that's strong on a foundational level. And, that's something that I think is important. I think that the human body has its own amount of stress that it can handle before it will produce a diseased state, right? Like you think about like a tumor being a kind of in some sense, a scapegoat mechanism where all of this uh, tumor is going to be formed as a kind of manifestation of the bad blood, the bad disorder, the low energy state, all of those things manifesting in this kind of proto organ like structure that starts growing rapidly in this kind of insane way. And I think that that's kind of an example of the height of stress cascading into a body that has had it enough, and it's breaking down into this kind of scapegoat mechanism on a tissue level. At the same time, human bodies collectively accumulating stress through strife, through malnourishment because of crop failure, due to plague causing sickness and chronic impairment of bodily function at a healthy level. All of those diseases that people can get over the years, like plague, famine, other kind of factors that create these types of illnesses. All those things can manifest to the point of a societal scapegoat mechanism in which bad blood intentions, according to Rene Girard, are so strong and so accumulated that it bursts out into the direction of a common enemy. At first, it's bursting out in fits and starts around each other, and then it tends to congregate towards a singular direction, and people will blame and truly believe that the person that is their target truly is guilty of kind of screwing up the system and causing everybody dysfunction, and it needs to be eliminated. And so what I'm saying is that the individual biological kind of stress mechanism is just one aspect of the societal stress mechanism resolution in the form of the scapegoat mechanism. So when Christ says, you are my body, right? That has so many implications, right? It has so many implications about how Christ's body was, how his mindset was, how his vibrational energy level was, how his ability to handle stress constructively rather than destructively, right? That kind of coherence that his body and mind and soul had in harmony, we become and can pursue through our own mindset and our own lifestyle choices to individually become like his body, to be able to endure stress without snapping into violence and rage. And there's that passage in the Bible about love keeps no record of wrongs, right? And yet we know that if your thyroid is impaired, according to people like Dr. Broda Barnes, that you will fixate on the past of every wrong that's been done unto you by somebody in your life. So if love keeps no record of wrongs, you can't love properly until you fix your thyroid, so to speak, right? And if you get your thyroid going in the right directions and proper nutrition, rest, and moving away from dysfunctional, social environments, you can actually resist the ability of those kind of same patterns to unfold again. You can actually have a healing state in your body where your mindset is filled with a can-do spirit, a creative spirit, not a fight or flight spirit. If you have a fight or flight spirit, you're going to be likely to get caught up in mimetic blame games against your neighbor. And that's going to aid into snowballing blame game directions towards one person or one group of people.
So do you feel like when Christ chose the disciples, right? He could have gone to the temple. He could have chose the Pharisees or the Sadducees. He could have grabbed some of these well-educated, higher up people of society. But do you feel like maybe their stress mechanisms were already so chaotic, so convoluted with the in crowd, the out crowd, that he chose those of negligible background, in the swamps, so to speak, of that ancient country land. He chose those that weren't of high regard. They didn't have these fancy jobs, these fancy clothes. Most of them, maybe Matthew might have, but he chose those that were maybe a little bit more free, right? Do you see the correlation with that and Ray Pete? I was thinking while you were talking about some of these things, it's, what's interesting about what Ray Pete has done is he has established himself with a core group of people. Georgie Dinkoff is very well educated, and he's sort of taken the torch and sort of carried it on after Ray. But it's interesting. There's a lot of fingers on, say X, that have carried on the mantle, in maybe even a bigger way. There's lots of people on X that are talking about Ray Pete, and they're studying, they're doing their hard work, but these aren't doctors, these aren't scientists, these are just kids, adults that love what this thing has done for them, what the environment Ray has caused for them, and the changes in their life. They've seen it, they've felt it, they've manifested it in their lives. And do you see that correlation between Christ and Ray?
Well, yeah, I mean, anything that's in the direction of truth is going to be, a pattern back into what, Jesus is doing in history, right? And I think it's interesting that, for example, like when you talk to, like what I just said earlier about, like, the Bible says love keeps no record of wrongs. And then you say, well, cortisol, or you talk about like thyroid function, and if you get your thyroid improved, that'll help you have an easier time having the joy of the Lord, and just effortlessly things rolling off your back more without having to really put a struggle to it, right? And
right.
God wants us, like, if Christians were acting more like Christ, they would create a society which was more truthful, more high trust, more structurally powerful, more high energy, more beautiful, more abundant and creative in its production of food, soil health, vehicles, energy production, defense. All these things would be more sane and smart, not insane and crazy and deranged. All of these deranged versions where people like Epstein and Diddy and all these stupid people are propped up are just all this manifestation of dysfunctional, stressed out organisms being manipulated by psychopaths who are also stressed out and disorderly as well, and insane. And they're just violent, and they know how to manipulate people, like the Stanford prison experiment. And So Jesus wants the human species to move past that, to have an abundant life, right? So when you're in the garden, there's fruits everywhere, right? It's a high thyroid environment. In theory, it gets dysfunctional because people are mimetic and they desire God's place. They desire his being and they want to eat him, literally, by eating the fruit, which is supposed to be a token of eating and becoming God, right? So the first move is this cannibalistic desire to possess the other's being, which is a stress move. It's a perception of stress. I am not that. I have to have that to be me, right? So the first step in human history that causes sin is an ungratefulness, which is motivated by a kind of stress. I can't just be safe as me. I must be him or have him and be like him, be like God, the serpent says, in order to be me, right? It's a feeling of incompleteness. And therefore there's a lack of joy in yourself and a lack of gratitude. And without that gratitude and without that joy, you're going to be prone to manipulations and psychopaths like the serpent represents. And so that cannibalistic desire, right, that is at the heart of all primitive religion, which it then becomes more powerful religions through the years. Christ comes in there and he gently, he doesn't in a stressed out way like every God we conceive of. He does it non-violently. He takes on a tremendous amount of stress, but he says, Father, forgive them. They don't know what they're doing. So he's obviously not consumed by stress to the point where it makes him lose his sense of self. Right? He's not screaming at him, kill him, kill him, kill him, God, near the end of his death.
He's actually organizing future plans for his for his mother.
Yeah. So he's taking care of business. He's not Superman. He's really feeling the pain. You know, he's not an Ubermensch fake fantasy like we create. He really feels the pain. It's anguish, but he's not letting it consume his being to the point where he breaks down and becomes the mouth of stress. You know, he doesn't utter, invectives against his enemies and revenge. You wait till I get you. Now his followers 2,000 years have been trying to imagine that's what he's really thinking. You wait till I come back. I'm going to get you, They add that in because they desire a hard to get God. They desire, because that's the kind of gods that we create, because oftentimes we create it out of stress mechanism dominated mind.
Right.
Right. So when you are in a scarcity stress mechanism dominated state, you will conceive of God in the image of that false state that God does not want us and did not create us to be in. He created those things as a backup system out of mercy so that we know how to handle and have a backup way of living in the midst of hardship. But that was never his intention, that we were to remain picking thorns and thistles rather than getting to the garden and better than the garden.
Wow.
That's the purpose of the new Adam, Christ, to restore us back to the garden, but go forward past the garden, not to pick thistles and thorns all day in a state of stress. The stress mechanism is meant to deal with the thistles and thorns that still persist in our minds and our lives because we persist in holding on to the stress mechanism, both biologically and societally, through the scapegoat violence that we do with politics and the state and the corporations and everything else that we feed upon in that whole system that we manifest together. Right. So the whole way of breaking through that is to understand the whole purpose of God's design. And that and here's the interesting thing is that we are so Cartesian, we're so dualistic. There's mind and then there's body over here. There's soul and then there's flesh. It's all these separations, and it's such a distortion and a waste of time for what Christians could be doing. Because when I mention something like thyroid or cortisol in relation to the Christian design, you'll see Christians viscerally sometimes recoil and say, oh, well, don't reduce it down to materialism. Whoa, they're so scared. And it's like, well, wait a second. Why is cortisol or thyroid function like alien to the project of Christ? Like it's God. He made it. But because it was designed, unfortunately, these terms are oftentimes terms that came about through the scientific domain, which is considered to be the domain of atheistic neo-Darwinists or something, right? They assume, well, if there's a word called cortisol, that came from atheistic agnostic world. We can be friends with it as it relates to our doctor telling us to take a medicine, to reduce cortisol. But it's a kind of tenuous relationship that Christians have with terms like cortisol. Like, I can't ever think of cortisol as like part of God's, like spiritual matter and concern for your life.
It's ironic
always,
that you're saying.
Yeah, it's always a secondary kind of like a kind of a naughty relationship. Like, yeah, well, technically, I do need to worry about my thyroid, but if I get too focused on that as my spiritual purpose by God, I'm gonna get a little bit too atheistic and Darwinistic then, or something. That's dualism.
What's ironic is Jesus enters a high cortisol state in going out into the desert and starving himself for 40 days, and thus he meets Satan himself in doing so, and then in his purpose starts his ministry thereafter.
Right.
So it's kind of ironic that he finds his purpose in a high cortisol state, denying himself food, and then immediately goes and starts it.
Well, isn't it interesting that it's 40 days of fasting that produces him being closest to choosing the way of Satan?
Yeah.
Because when he's to the top of the mountaintop, which overlooks the city of Jericho, traditionally, I was there in the old town of Jericho, and you stand over the ruins of the tell, and they say, this is where we used to do human sacrifice as you eat your bananas. And this, ladies and gentlemen, is where we do human sacrifice thousands of years ago. Thank you very much. We would worship the moon, see the moon up there. We would look at that, and bam, there goes a child. There goes a goat here. And then you look over at this mountain, and I'm like, what's that mountain over there? And they said, that's the traditional mountain that we consider the temptation of Christ to have happened by tradition. And there's a little monastery there. I don't know how they climb up there because it's sheer off of a cliff.
Wow.
I mean, it's like a window. You just crawl up straight up the cliff on a little dusty rope straight from Noah's Ark, and you climb that thing up, and there's a little monastery, hanging out there. But other than that, that's the temptation of Christ mountain, tradition says, and so if you think of that as something of significance as possibly where it was, then you would see that when Jesus is brought to that mountain, so to speak, so he's climbing that mountain and he has this temptation from Satan, the temptation, is be like me and you will have the kingdoms of the world. Well, the kingdoms of the world, as Jericho was demonstrating right in front of his eyes, function at their very heart on sacrificial violence, which is a stress mechanism solution to problems, but it's not what God designed, right? And so, in other words, what I'm trying to say is the conceptions that we have created about God in our stressed states through the years is not what God had in mind. That's what we created. God tolerated it in his infinite mercy and allowed us the time to try to work it through so that we could find a way to love him, even though he loves us unconditionally. Makes sense? We love God because of the conditions, because we have a stressed mechanism, polluted view of how we perceive God, because we have that biochemical system running our whole operating system with a fight or flight kind of drive underneath that's manifested a lot hotter than it needed to be. God doesn't want us to stay in that state, but he has permitted in his grace and his mercy for us to keep making these kind of distorted mental concepts of him such that it would be sufficient enough for us to do the right thing directionally, right? But at the end of the day, God does not have the same view. Because just think about it for one moment. How many people are like scared to death about meeting God the Father? Now, I understand there is a reverence that you don't want to like mock the idea of reverence and respect. That's just part of that's almost the same thing as wonder, right? When you have wonder, your heart is filled with something beyond yourself, right? When you're a child and you're climbing through the forest, or you find a new cave or a little lagoon with your friends, there's an enchantment and a wonder that's not that far away from the idea of reverence and respect for God. They're all part of the same feeling in some sense. But when you meet God, there's a lot of people who are just scared to death that he's like this angry, kind of a hard Marine drill sergeant, right? And that when you get before God, he's going to ask you questions. Let me see, Jordan, were you a good person or a great person? And you're like, I don't know, God, this is a trick question. I think I was good. Wrong. You can't be good. You're totally wrong without me. You're going to hell. Boom. Got it wrong. Next. Like he's this distant, mechanical, hard ass Marine drill sergeant, right? Well, the reason why we conceive of that concept about God is because the type of gods that we have been creating for thousands of years are most closely associated with military might, kings and queens and princes and their powers, and that's the way they display. That's the way they display their might.
Yeah.
That violent might makes right. I am the boss. You better not tick me off. You better not disrespect me or I'll get you. Well, guess what? That's a stress-induced state. God is not owned by cortisol. He's not like us. He's not bound by these chemical processes that we associate with power and might. It's our stress mechanisms perspective about what power and might looks like, because that's the way it's demonstrated through history.
You know what's interesting? That makes me.
God's not owned by that. He's not owned by a low thyroid state. He's not. Oh, I'm so angry. You better not make me mad. Why would he be? That's the biggest insult you could say to the Creator.
Yeah, that makes me think of I'm sure you've left your family for a period of time, like when you were younger. You go away to a camp or you go on a trip with your friends and you miss your parents, right? And one of the first things, at least for me, I don't know about you or others, but when I would go away from my parents, the first thing I would think about, like when my dad or my mom would come to my brain, would be that nice home cooked meal. You miss it. You just you can smell it. Even if sometimes it wasn't the greatest, you still miss it. Because that's home, that's comfort. And that might be interesting why God, presents himself in the text as a good father, a good shepherd. A good shepherd feeds his sheep, and tends to them and cares for them. And so it's funny that Jesus, he leaves us with a meal. He leaves us with the comfort of saying, hey, this is my body, this is my blood. You can have this as often as you need it, and for comfort, for peace, for serenity, for vitality, for character, for morality's sake. That's interesting. I
and then the moment you say that Jesus wants you to enjoy euphoria and dopamine as part of that experience of partaking in his body, they say you're reducing it to material. That's not true. It's not reducing. God wants to live here. Right. That's he wants to live and he wants to live here on planet Earth.
Right.
And he wants to live here in your body as the Holy Spirit dwelling in your temple.
Wow. Yeah.
So of course he wants you to have a state of joy. The joy of the Lord is my strength. What can stop you when you are truly in a state of joy? And that's easier said than done. There's no formula for, really, really, like, how do you get there, right? Because you can try so many different ways, and it seems like you're running uphill, and then you do one little thing, and everything is running downhill. It's much easier. So, there's infinite variables, kind of, if you want to get honest about, how this all plays out. But, it's not something that we should take lightly. We should take it with real courage.
Yeah, it's sad to me that there has been so many Christians throughout history, and like you said, the words of vitality, the words of abundance are just typically not attached.
Yeah.
Those words are often found in the third world countries' ghettos. Oh, these people, they have such a peace about them in the midst of such chaos and rampant violence and lack of food, lack of water. You know, they hike miles and miles just to get a little tea kettle's worth of water. You know, these are the happy. It's like, why is that? Why have we failed to understand what that meal should be doing for us and our thyroid and our you know, why has it taken, you know, 2,000 years to start to unravel some of these things, these great mysteries? You know, it shouldn't have taken this long. It's
Because
sad.
again, if you're in a stressed out state, consumed and dominated by stress, and all that comes along with that, you're more prone to make error. You're more prone to have a fight or flight, zero sum mindset about rivalries, which will then breed mimetic crises in the community, which then breeds, you know, haphazard attempts to do scapegoat discharges of bad blood, which then creates reciprocal blowback because the scapegoat mechanism no longer unifies. It no longer creates unanimity. It no longer creates a kind of shared catharsis and release of tensions because nobody can truly believe together on who the real enemy is. You know, there's, you know, some group thinks that this candidate is the enemy that must be defeated for things to get back to normal. And other people think it's this group or that race group or this thing or this ideology, or the MAGA people need to be eliminated. Somebody has to be completely destroyed and humiliated and so forth and subjugated or something in order for there to be peace. Nobody believes in any kind of unified consensus about who is the villain that must be destroyed. And therefore, the bad blood never gets fully discharged. It just creates more, you know, kind of like schisms and breakaways and frictions and obsessions with competition. And that's why, you know, people aren't able to move past these things. It's slower than it should be, you know. And if you get your mindset right, get your body and soul at a high state, so you're performing well and you have that creative spirit to pursue things like energy too cheap to meter, or, you know, gravity control devices, or, you know, elemental transmutation at room temperature, where we could take trash, grind it up using microwaves, being able to produce rare earth elements without having to mine the earth and destroy the earth, or having, you know, things like CO2 enriched greenhouses and other kind of outside the box modalities for greatly enhancing and increasing the production and yield of, you know, critical fruit trees and crops that people expect to enjoy. You know, all of these things, or using CO2 in creative ways that used to be done in the 1950s, and bringing those ideas back and improving upon them to have healing effects for a whole variety of different issues, psychological and chronic diseases, a whole host of things with just a common gas like carbon dioxide. All of those things I just mentioned seem so high above the average person's ability to tackle. But if we start pushing in those directions and start aiming our fire and attention towards those things being real, they just need to be manifested, so to speak. It's like, you know, we know there's gold underneath this mine. We just got to dig it out. And once you know that, once you have that surety that abundance is our birthright, and that includes energy, transportation, affordable housing that's high quality and beautiful, and diseases that can be eliminated with common things like carbon dioxide and other just basic, you know, minerals. We look at what, like you mentioned, Georgie earlier, he's doing great work with tumors, some of the most lethal human tumors you can get in the lab, considered incurably, you know, lethal. And he's using B1 and B3 and I think biotin B7 in conjunction with aspirin to reduce these and knock out these most lethal form of human tumors they have in the labs, that he says. So look at that creativity, using the principles that Ray has talked about, and building a little bit of a formula and trial and error with rats. You know, the B vitamins and aspirin are some of the most cheap, abundant materials you could find. And that's
And
something. And then Dr. Lewis Coleman talks about that same disease, which I have to be careful talking about it because we're trying to get through the little fascist stress mechanism people, that these websites are owned by. But Lewis Coleman's talked about that same disease being, helped with carbon dioxide, So there's so many things here right under our noses, literally. That's what carbon dioxide literally, they say the truth is right under your nose. You're inhaling, and you're inhaling and exhaling the truth right under your nose.
Wow. That makes me think about, the fact that, Jesus takes, and that's how I've found truth through the years. I haven't lived a very long life just yet, but, in my little bit of time, it's, Jesus works with elementary level things sometimes and makes these massive points. He feeds 5,000 people with a piece of bread and some fish. It's just simple. It's just dumb simple. And I was watching a video. You mentioned the hurricanes. You have this downtime and this thing's coming and coming and it's haunting you. And so that you're just kind of bored there, just waiting on this thing to wreak havoc. And so I was watching some of these travel shows, and this guy wandered into the territory of Russia in one of the most polluted cities of the world. And it's just fascinating that you brought this up because they have mined so much, and there's so much toxicity in this city. I forget the name, and I don't even want to try to butcher it. But there is so much debris from what they're mining, metals and chemicals in these plants, that it has fallen onto the soil, and you can literally just take soil samples and now you have those compounds because there's so much toxicity, so much clouds, you can barely breathe there. And these people just work in it. It's up near the Arctic Circle, and so it's already thick, hard to breathe air, and so it's just stagnated. But I just thought that was such an interesting little tidbit there, that they do all this work, all of this chaos, all of this shaking, all of this manipulating of these digging tools, and all just this hard effort, and it's on the soil. It's like, if you could just do it from the beginning, you'd realize. And they've just not studied those things that you're talking about, and we've not worked in that direction. We've worked in the we need these massive tools, we need this steam, we need this power. And
Because
it's like, no, Jesus's way
yeah,
is simple. It was always simple. God's way is simple. There's just a fruit over there, you just eat that fruit, you just sip on that milk. Mother's milk will take care of you. It's always so much more simple. We complicate everything.
Well, that's what like entropy and the zero sum mindset kind of go hand in hand. And that's the reason why you don't get much success going after the esteemed experts to get you to kind of join you in your movement of change for the good, right? Is that the experts are typically people who are highly stressed, and they're jockeying for power and social status. They're very scared, so they're not going to do anything to rock the boat. They're not going to do anything to put them in the line of sight of a scapegoat execution in terms of their university or their profession of power and influence at a government agency. They're never going to really put it all on the line. By nature, the institutions are institutionally designed around a kind of stressed mindset and a zero-sum mindset that is going to submit its mind to groupthink no matter what. That's not a high vibrational, high thyroid, creative, healthy, abundant mindset that has this. It's a kind of false. If I hide in the institutional lab and go along with this bioweapon or this garbage protocol for this disease or that disease, then I'll just get my little pension and get my little attaboy and get vacation. My little 3-day, my little 5-day vacation once a year. My little generic overpriced drinks and overpriced this, and I won't do anything to rock the boat. That is all a stressed kind of zero-sum mindset that produces that. That was the same thing that was animating the so-called experts of religion that Jesus had to deal with in his time, right? They were all kind of basically operating under the same mindset. And they were, the Sadducees didn't want to rock the boat with the Romans and the privilege they had, and the high priest and the, didn't want to rock his situation. The Pharisees had their corruption, they had their clout, and they didn't want to rock their situation. They didn't want to, they were stressed out. Why do you not hang out with a leper? You're stressed, you're going to get it. Okay. You're not looking for cures at that point. You're looking at, well, God loves me because I'm not a leper. And I want to be that leper, but not too close, right? Because I'm stressed out. And the lepers are getting leprosy because of stress, right? Malnutrition, you know what I mean? There's different bacteria, different things going on that are producing diseases that, thanks be to God, people have been alleviated by the scapegoat mechanisms, delusions, and myth-making violence to the point where we can take out some of these diseases more effectively and see them in the rearview mirror. But of course, other diseases have popped up along the way because of our hubris and our desire to, like not lead, and that's the thing, man, is that like science, one of the things I wrote about this in one of my pieces, that, science should be led with love. If you're not leading science with love, you will produce stupid outcomes that on the paper follow the scientific method, but are doing aimless, stupid tasks that don't actually solve the disease you're trying to solve, or, achieve the invention you really want to achieve. It's just basically you're operating within a paradigm to express that you're very obedient to that paradigm itself, rather than actually doing things, getting things done, right? And like tangibly in the physical world, especially, very little good science, I think, is properly being done, because universities they're not places for creativity. They're places for low thyroid. They're places for high cortisol, high politicking. You're always getting politics thrown at you. You're always writing for more grants to be issued by a corrupt government agency. It's all corrupt, all zero sum. And that's why Jesus couldn't find a religious renaissance within the Pharisees and the Sadducees of his time. They wanted to kill him because, he represented a dissolution of their whole false reality. And the same thing will happen in our time today. The cures for all these big diseases and the solutions for pollution and the solutions for energy will not come from any of those experts. The only thing they will do is that some of those so-called official experts will peel off as whistleblowers or they will kind of be rebels once the actual catalyst for change get the ball rolling to a point that can't be denied.
Right. And that's interesting. The myth, the great myth that Jesus, I believe, sort of awakened and gave energy to, is that, if in the 21st century, if I become a doctor, I will become somebody. Well, tell that to Georgie, probably extremely prior to Ray Pete. Maybe he humdrums it and doesn't start asking questions of his own accord. Then, and it's no offense to his past, right? I'm not trying to be offensive, but maybe zero people hear of Georgie. Maybe zero people are aware of his creativity, of his ability to attack big problems. Maybe he never comes into that.
I think Georgie would prefer that zero people know about him. He wants to stay away.
And I know he's a very, very humble guy, and it's all through history. Most of the people that we've heard about are the ding dong peoples of life, people that just stepped out, who would have heard of Peter? Peter would have been a nobody that died as a nobody that nobody would have cared about. No. Peter has some of the most beautiful buildings this world has ever seen with his name on the building. The first shall be last. Jesus said it. It's happened, and it's continuing to happen. And it's only those that are willing to question, those that are willing to be different. Who's from Nazareth? Zero people have come from Nazareth. Well, one of the greatest man that's ever lived has come from Nazareth. So it's this, that's the myth that, well, if I just knuck up under this system, this theology, this ideology, I will be a force for change. And history has said, no, you won't. You got to step out. You got to walk on the water a little bit.
Yeah. I just think, when you think about you know, people's conception of the purpose of their life. Is it to, you know, maximize pleasure to the point of
Mm.
not out to what you could do? An immediate gratification is not a high energy place to be. You know, people who are estrogen dominant tend to be extremely uh, horny and ready to go in an insane level because they are a stressed organism. The organism's basically trying to, you know, reproduce before it dies. You know, and
Mm.
that's why you get that state, right? And people are, you know, constantly having, you know, these, you know, people become addicted to conflict as a means of producing the stress event that then allows for cortisol or whatever to mop up things. So they become addicted to these stress hormones, which are designed to kind of stabilize the fire of, you know, of a very stressed out situation psychologically. Or, you know, if you're arguing with someone who can't find a way to have harmony with you and you can't either, that's the same thing as, you know, constantly fighting bees every day in your cave. That's a very stressful environment. If you put your cave and constantly swatting bees every day, at some point you got to figure out how to get along with those bees or get out. And you know, a lot of people are in environments like that, and it's not an easy thing to figure out how to resolve, right? Because there's sometimes people are addicted to staying in their dysfunctional state because the dysfunctional state is more convenient and comfortable than the higher energy state.
Mm.
Right? The higher energy state is scary because with greater power and greater energy becomes the opportunity to do greater mistakes, right? You know
Right.
what I mean? If
Mm.
you're if you're the Wright brothers and you're making bicycles, well, everybody's making bicycles. You make a lot of money. They had a bicycle shop, and those brothers made bicycles. And it's a lot easier to just stay there, you know, competing with everybody else for bicycles. It's a lot more stressful to get in a flying machine and try to fly off into the air. Right? That's a stressful situation to go through, right? And,
Yeah,
you
because
make
that's
it
easy.
right.
That's all you've known. You know, your dad was a bicycle owner. You know, rode bikes his whole life with his grandfather. That's all you know. That's easy. That's first choice.
But if you're like, think about it, everybody else is on the ground cycling around, and you're like, no, I think we can make a flying machine and get up in the air, move around up there.
Mm. Everybody hates you for that
Well, yeah,
choice.
that's insane. And then with greater
Your dad
power,
begs and pleads for you, son. I know what's best for you.
what's with greater power comes what? The potential for flying your flying machine into someone's house, right? You can't do that with a bike,
Mm.
you know? So
Yeah,
it's easy to
you stop.
take a bike.
The bank stops loaning you money. You know, they foreclose your house
Yeah.
because
You're
you've
thinking of like,
chosen this
I was
new
thinking of
way of
like,
living.
yeah, the famous Nikola Tesla story where he's trying to build his, you know, tower of power, and he runs out of funding from Westinghouse, the, you know, the banker lender guy who's decides to, or was, excuse me, I think it was Morgan, JP
Mm.
Morgan. Westinghouse was the electric company, and they decided to pull the plug on funding him. Uh,
Mm.
and he had all those debts that he had to basically, you know, be, you know, smothered by, you know. So debt,
Yeah.
you look at debt, you know, debt is not the high energy, high structure creating force of society. You know, it's a
Mm.
kind of, it's the absence of that, you know. And so when you have to have your greatest minds and their best technology crushed by debt debt lending, you know, and all the games that go along with that,
Mm.
that example of that stress state of mind, again, overcoming and pushing back the progress of a
Right.
mind that's in a state of joy and abundance and creativity. You
It
know?
just goes to show, you know, the levels that there's, you know, we always look at these great stories and we're like, wow, that's beautiful. But we fail to sometimes see the little baby steps where that person could have given up. They could have said, they fold to the stress, they fold to the cortisol, they fold to the pressure. At each step there's a pressure. And when you own your own business, there's pressure daily. There's another phone call, there's another upset person, there's a thing that's not perfect, there's another bill, and it's just stress, stress, stress. But and then 10 years, 15 years down the road, you see the fruits of those labors of pushing through, of persevering. And those are the stories that need to be said. I've had the fortunate place to see, where your show for a long, long time. I saw you there in radio, and before that writing articles. What if you would have just said, no, I'm good here I'm just going to stick to writing articles. I'm just good here to just play on the radio. Oh no, I'm just at all of these points you could stop, and there could be unbelief because well, I gotta pay this bill, man. I gotta just nut down and forget it all. Forget the great dreams. Forget the great creativity that you saw when you were younger. And those things eat at you. But you just, nah. I'm okay. I'll just get a 9 to 5. No, and sometimes you need to for a moment, and then you bounce right back.
Yeah.
And that's a part of the journey too. Sometimes it's a little more meandering than just straight up the sheer face mountain, and you conquer Satan just in one fell swoop. It doesn't always get to be that clean and nice.
Yeah, that's what Ray talks about, learned helplessness, which is the problem of our time. We're stuck in, again, this entropy psyop and this zero sum psyop, which then produces a kind of outcome of learned helplessness. Well, I can't do anything better than this. I can't do anything better than seed oil chips for my family because that's how we're going to buy that house we need. Well,
Right.
I can't buy a house without Babylonian interest rates. I can't do anything, without this kind of Faustian bargain that has to rip apart my soul. No, you don't have to take that zero sum mindset, because
Right.
the zero sum mindset is, again, predicated on another myth of entropy, which is that, in other words, they say it's a law. It's not a law of physics, but it's something that they kind of bake into our sense making apparatuses at every level, which is that things fall apart, that the longer, the universe continues, eventually it'll all burn up and the planet will burn up, everything will fall apart and the sun will die out. And this kind of mindset that everything just kind of trends towards dysfunction and disorder and decay is a lie, right? Because real science and real biology, as Ray pointed to, it says that things tend towards order and more structure and more energy and more structure and more energy, and it feeds on itself to a higher and higher state. And Christianity, and he gets that only as a outcome of the effects of Christianity and unveiling the truth of how things are, because the folks that he was listening to were influenced by Christian, even if some of them weren't metaphysically onto everything Christian. They were still culturally perceiving the world in the way the Christian world is seen, which is that things begin in a garden, they end in a city. So it's not entropic. It's not things begin in a garden and then they end in a very broken down, beat up garden, and that's the end. Thanks, guys. It's a wrap. That's not the picture of the Bible. The picture is building upon things, building upon structure and energy given to you, and then creating with your mind and your spontaneity of thought more forms of structure and energy to be manifested in the history of reality. And so the lion shall lay down with the lamb is not entropic. It is higher energy states, to the point where the lion and the lamb don't need to have their predator-prey relationship. They can actually have a different state where maybe they're drinking orange juice together, so to speak. This is something that, humans, because they're the viceroy of creation and have God's image in us, we are able, if we can get past the stress mechanism in our bodies and start through our mindset. It's not everybody has to eat food certain ways. It's the mindset, number one, right? And then
Right.
because you know, I'm living proof, man. I've done if Ray's right and the ketogenic diet and that kind of thing is the wrong way to go, I have been putting my body through some hell since 2004, and I've come up with some hella good spontaneously creative ideas through my life. So I'm proof positive as an example that you don't have to be drinking loads of orange juice to even come up with your ideas. Okay, even though I citrus company, I loved honey tangerines so much. I ate a bag of them from Florida one day. They were so good. They had horrible marketing. I said, I got to create a company to represent this product. They didn't take care of their trees. Their trees had low metabolism, low thyroid trees. These were trees that were sick. They were stressed. These were low energy trees. They died. I couldn't even save them. All I was doing beautiful marketing with my company. The growers said they'd take care of it. They didn't. They failed. The trees failed. They died. And those beautiful honey tangerines are so hard to find right now. But one day, when I get my CO2 and I get my other products in line, my music, when I find the right song, I will grow citrus trees better than we've ever seen before. And so, so my point is to say, why do we have to pick one? Why do we have to pick one lane? That's what I want to ask people. Why do we have to pick one lane? Is it possible you can write fantastic books, make great art, make a movie, make better tangerines than anybody's ever made before using classical music and CO2 and hell, maybe make a hoverboard before I'm dead. Can I do that? If I can do that, that's fine. And if we can have great relationships and great joy and see people healed, you wait till we get these CO2 bags around people's feet that are injured. Think about all these people's grandmothers who've got feet with low oxygen. You look at the foot, it looks like it's a crypt creeper. It's like there. You put a CO2 bag around there and watch that tissue. Watch the vasodilation. Watch the energy happening. Watch that pink color come back. The blood flow's going. Why can't we have that? Why are we sitting around eating Hardee's? Why aren't we putting bags of CO2 around people's feet? Healing their feet. These freaking grandmas are walking around, they can't feel their feet. And you're okay with that? Why would you be okay with that? You're going to live forever. You're going to have forever to think about how you could have done something about that. Come on. Right? You're going to live forever on this planet Earth. What are we going to be doing? I don't know, but it's going to be awesome. And it's going to be higher vibration than this. And we don't say higher vibration like the cool kids on TikTok say it. They don't know what they're talking about. We literally mean it. Because as Dr. Yu says, every particle is magnetic and every particle has its own frequency of vibration, including our energy. Energy is not woo-woo. Energy is a manifestation of the way our body was designed. Magnetic particles oscillate resonance together in coherent harmony. We're going to go further than what Ray was doing the biology. We're going to link it back up to physics. We're going to link it up to anthropology. We're going to link it all back because it all comes from Jesus. Jesus gives us the impetus to think boldly and creatively because we don't waste our time believing in experts propped up by mythic violence.
Yeah, that's the warrior mentality that we've lost. The warrior king. We think that that's far fetched. We think that that's unattainable for me. Great for him, that guy. He was wonderful. Not for me. But it's moment by moment. He became a warrior king not because he slayed it. No, he became a warrior king because he beat that guy right there. And then he beat that guy right there. And then he beat that guy right there. And he saw each one of those as an individual moment to conquer. When you wake up in the morning, maybe you missed out on your sleep like we talked about earlier. Maybe you have a porous start to your day. But your next step, that's what you conquer. Boom. And then you conquer another boom. And then boom. And you have little conquers throughout the day.
Yeah,
and you make your way to your warrior kingdom.
So one of the things about low thyroid state is you don't finish what you wanted to do. So if you've got a project in the back, you got to finish it. If you don't want to do it, don't do it. If you've got a project to, write a song, finish writing the song. So start
Right.
with little things that you've got that are left unfinished in your life that are good and
Mm.
beneficial, give you pleasure
Yeah,
and
that's
meaning,
rich.
and finish those things. And I've got plenty of those stacked up. I got a lot of things I got to finish. There's things that I have to do, you know.
Yeah,
But
they call those honey to-do lists when they come from the wife, but when they come from within, they have cobweb corners.
yeah, yeah. And sometimes it's not my fault. Sometimes God just literally just pours a bucket of stuff for me to do, like a game show host that, you know, when you press the wrong button and a bunch of water bucket with apples or something just falls all over your head, dousing you. And you're, dear God, what did you give me now? Do you really want me to look this crazy, God? I was already working on it. He's like, no, you're taking too long on the anthropology stuff. I'm gonna throw you biology now, baby. And I said, oh Lord, what do I do now? And I just run with it, you know. And I said, oh, but I got to finish that. He's like, not right now. You're too slow on that. Got other things to do. I'm going to hand that off to Jacob now. Jacob's going to take that one. Too slow getting that book out, David. So anyway, you know, that's another thing. I can tell. I don't know what it is, thyroid or whatever, but I have a hard time wanting to write a book because everybody's been wanting me to write books since since 2006 at least. And I mean, it's just like, I just have these perpetual book concepts in my head, and I've got to get one of them out eventually. Anyway, but then I've got music, I've got movies, I've got to wrestle managers, I've got to sing some songs, I got a lot of stuff going on, and, everybody else seems dead around me. I feel like I'm on normal speed and everybody's slowly moving, and I'm like, why are you not doing, don't you know what you could do?
Right.
Not everybody is, called to, write books about anthropology and biology and sing and manage vicious wrestlers and, do all these things, crazy stuff, and make a movie at the same time that you're making songs. I mean, not everybody's called to do that, but I think there's a lot more opportunity for people than they imagine that they're capable of doing, right?
Right.
I think that's the point, is just trying to, stop with these narratives of zero sum and entropy. And those are the two ones that are so toxic, and they infect Christianity. Again, not Christianity as actually it is, but Christianity as it's, and sometimes practiced in an erroneous way, which is this. Again, think about it. Think about this for one moment. They really think that God is this super strict Marine, drill sergeant. Why is the drill sergeant designed that way? He's trying to take all the spontaneity and creativity out of his little group. Is that what God's like? Do you think God wanted to create you to be a member of a Marine unit so that you can have all the spontaneity and creativity and learned helplessness? Well, I got to go fight this war. Why? Because some oligarch who owns my politician tells me I have to. Oh, okay. That's learned helplessness. Sorry.
Literally, that's the definition. Yeah.
That's literally learned helplessness. I'm really mad. Yeah, I went and terrorized random Iraqis in their homes. Why'd you do that? Because it was fun and we thought we were doing the right thing. Well, why'd you go back 100 times more? Whatever,
That's what they told me to.
Okay. All right. And then what'd you get out of that? You got Babylonian interest payment on your house when you got back. And you got stress mechanism out the wazoo, passed down to your kids now.
Yeah.
And created like 1,000 more terrorists because of your actions. So what'd you do? Okay. At some point people need to, and they're doing it, right? Everything I'm saying is what folks who actually go to these disgusting wars are actually saying. We shouldn't be fighting proxy wars on behalf of people who think that they are the greatest ethnicity and everybody else is scum and trash. I don't care what your ethnicity is. That's not what our military was designed to support and aid and abet. Okay?
Right.
That's called stress mechanism out the wazoo. We should not be co-signing for that garbage. Okay? We should be thinking like Christians do. Christians are the adults in the room, people who think that they're special boys by birth or genetics. are the children in the room. It's time to stop being governed by, and it's an insult to children, by fools and half-wits who are completely owned to a shriveling degree of stress, and start actually thinking with creativity, spontaneity, and joy and possibility, and owning it. Because what can they do? Strike our lives? Will become more powerful than they can possibly imagine. Because Christians are the kind of people that when we create cold fusion, you want to kill us, you're only going to make it bigger. You want to create elemental transmutation, they're going to kill you for doing that, it's only going to get bigger. You want to stop us from doing CO2, put us in prison, it's only going to get bigger. My power is made perfect in weakness. The stone the builders rejected has become the cornerstone. When they expel you for creating CO2 and looking like a fool, it only makes it bigger when it's the truth that you're pursuing. Okay? So you have nothing to lose in following Christ, except your life, which is nothing to lose because you're already resurrected. And you will be fully resurrected on the other side. You know?
Beautiful.
I appreciate your time. Thanks, Jordan, for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
Hey, you stay dry out there with these hurricanes.
That's all we can do. We will conquer.
Yeah, we need to start using these devices to move the hurricanes away from people. That's the idea that Christians do.